I would like to welcome everybody to the third in a series that is being offered by the New York City Peer and Community Health Workforce Consortium in their Leadership and Professional Development series. Aviva Cohen is the coordinator for the consortium, but unfortunately she was not able to be here today, but she extends a welcome to you all. Next slide, Varsha. For those of you who may not be familiar with the New York City Peer and Community Health Workforce Consortium, it came out of a group of peer workforce experts at a workforce summit that happened in 2016, where they suggested the formation of a centralized team to engage and partner with stakeholders, identify best practices, key competencies and functions, and increase the capacity for employers to be supportive of workforce integration and growth. And at the end of this webinar, we'll give a little bit more information about a toolkit that the consortium has put together. We'll step you through a little bit about it, but it is very much in line with this whole topic of peer career advancement. Next slide, Varsha. If you haven't already done so, the chat feature, which is, if you haven't got it open on your screen, is available from the right-hand side of your screen. There are three little bubbles at the bottom and the one that looks like a speech bubble. You can open that up and you can use that to access the chat. We'll be asking questions and asking you to comment in that chat throughout the webinar. And so if you want to just get started by introducing yourself, your name, where you're from, and a little bit about what you do, your job title or role, that would be great. And again, the next slide, Varsha, is just how you get to the chat. So if you show the arrow that goes backwards that I didn't fix, just go ahead and advance. It'll do a little animation there on how to get to everyone. In that drop-down box, you want to make sure that you have everyone selected so that everyone can see your chat feature, your chat. So today's presenters are Gita Enders, who is with New York City Health and Hospitals, Kevin Cleare, who is with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And we have resource panelists who are joining us. As I mentioned at the beginning, there was a workshop at the recent New York City Peer Specialist Conference at New York University in July on peer career advancement, and that was led by Liz Breier, Jessica Wolf, and Jeremy Ruling. And Jessica and Liz are here with us today to add a little bit more to this presentation based on what they talked about in that webinar. We have technical support from Varsha Comet, who is with our Academy of Peer Services. Regina Schoen and Chris Coyle are our Office of Mental Health Consumer Affairs technical support specialists who are helping with this. And they're actually regional consumer advocacy specialists, but they're helping us with the technology. And I'm Rita Kronice, your moderator, and I'm with the Academy of Peer Services virtual learning community. Next slide. By the end of today, we hope you'll be able to recognize a range of options that can lead to career advancement, describe how advancement differs depending on the workplace, consider peer support values when deciding whether a promotion or a different role can provide the same level of satisfaction as you may be getting as a direct care peer support provider, describe strategies that can lead to increased opportunities for career advancement, and then the idea of developing an action plan for designing and developing your own career. And with that, I'd like to invite Gita Enders to give a little bit of a talk about her journey in workforce advancement. Gita?
Hey, Rita. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, as Rita mentioned, or as on the opening slide, I'm with NYC Health and Hospitals here in New York City, the public health system. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my career advancement. Varsha, hang on. I just want to say that I do a lot of speaking on peer career advancement, very interested in promoting it. In fact, I don't know if many of you are from out of the city, but Jonathan Edwards from DOHMH and I present a workshop called Career Chat at many conferences. We have it in for INAP's proposal, and hopefully we'll be doing it there too and giving out our nice career-oriented keepsakes. Anyway, next slide, please. So why did I want to even work in the peer field? Because I have lived experience and special training, because we do not do medical model assessment and treatment. We support and encourage. And here at H&H and elsewhere, we work in conjunction with traditional staff to help navigate individuals to ongoing treatment if that is their choice. Next slide. Pardon the small print. So I'm really happy with my career trajectory. It's been a long haul. This story starts in 2003, where I was housebound, told I would never work again, and living on a mountain from which I would come down every Tuesday to do grocery shopping and go to my bipolar support group. I heard that they were opening up a recovery center, a clubhouse model, and since I was down the mountain already once a week, I decided to dip my toe in and do some volunteering. And I did kitchen cleaning. I didn't cook because I'm not good at it. Facilitated some groups. And just generally, general volunteerism, I guess you would call it. And one day, Arizona State Behavioral Health Planning Council, I should mention, I was in Arizona, was looking for consumer members. So I can't even tell you why I did this, but it turned out to be a great networking opportunity. They traveled once a month to different peer-oriented activities, and it was just a wonderful experience. And by this time, I was volunteering every day, and so I was asked by it was run by a small nonprofit called NASCARE, Northern Arizona Consumers Advancing Recovery and Empowerment, and they asked if I felt I could manage the center. So they gave us peer support training with another name that many of you may know, or possibly not, Lori Ashcraft, who then was Meta Services Recovery Innovation. And as soon as we finished our peer support training, I was promoted to regional program director. The nonprofit had 6 recovery centers. So I was on the east side of the state in Cottonwood, Show Low, and Tucson. Now, this is important. I was offered the opportunity to provide direct peer service, and I had not done that, and I was kind of tired of being a bureaucrat. So I switched agencies to the clinic where I was receiving services, and because I had the training, I was able to get a job as a peer support specialist, which title at that agency, the Verde Valley Guidance Clinic, was recovery coach. And this is something that's a little confusing in our business. I know that there are all kinds of wellness coach, peer specialist, peer counselor, recovery advocate. What's important is providing service and being with our peers. And this was a great agency because even though they were medical model, they were very, very peer-oriented. Now we're in about 2005. Now, a moment about networking. Back in 2003, when I joined the Planning Council, I met a lot of C-suite executives. I met CEOs from most of the peer-run agencies in the state. And so at one of these, actually at 3 of these meetings, the CEO of a peer-run in Scottsdale, Visions of Hope, Arizona, asked me if I would be interested in developing peer specialist training for his agency. And this, if I had not networked with these people, this would never have happened. And so I was a little shaky, but I used a lot of resources, and he was very helpful at working with supervision to do this. Was very empowering. And I did that. Now we're in 2008. I did that until 2013, when I saw the advertisement for the job that I have now. At the time, it was called Consumer Affairs Coordinator. So once again, I switched agencies and came here to New York, back to New York, I should say, to oversee some of the peer programming here at H&H. And now we're in 2015, and they talked me into getting a social work degree and a license, so I would be a qualifying health professional to supervise peer specialist, which is in the, right now is in the Medicaid reimbursement language. And soon after, I was promoted to a director title. And so, so this is a slide that Jonathan and I, you can wait, Martha, until I ask you. You can change the slide, please. This is a slide that we use at the Career Chat workshop with Jonathan, because I take this moment after I tell my 2003 to 2019, so we'll call it my 20-year journey in peer support, to just make the point that this is optional. You may be quite happy and you may want to rise in your organization. You may be thinking about change. You might be tired of where you're working or making the money you're making, and you might be ready to move. You might be between jobs, and you might have just landed somewhere and need to work on settling in and finding what you're meant to do and who you were meant to be. So I just like to always have this up to make the point that we know recovery is a journey, not a destination, and so is career choices. Okay, next slide. So just to summarize the opportunities that are available to you in a peer career. And a little later in the presentation, hopefully someone will talk about things you can do and different ways you can go in your journey. But what was successful for me, I volunteered. This was great. I was getting Social Security. I didn't have to worry about losing it. I networked with people on the Planning Council, which was also a volunteer situation. Began to present at conferences locally first, and then national conferences like Alternatives and INAPS. Work closely with your supervisor. My supervisors, from James Russo, the CEO at Visions of Hope, worked with me on the Peer Specialist Training Program. My supervisor, Mary Lee Burns, here at H&H, was consistently encouraged me to obtain the social work license, and I choose to stay within the peer framework. And the last item, which would be, sometimes you have to change organization. Sometimes there's a glass ceiling for peers. Sometimes you've done everything you can, or you've learned everything you want to. And so I'm not suggesting that people job hop for no reason, but sometimes a lateral move might be what you want to make to get into a different area of services. So I think that's it. Next slide. And that's the quick elevator speech on career advancement while staying peer informed. Thanks.
Thank you, Gita. That was great. And We do have an opportunity to ask questions in the chat. I will be monitoring in any point in time throughout the webinar. If you have a question that comes up while one of the presenters is speaking, or just a comment that you'd like to make, please do feel free to do that. So I'll just open it up for questions now as you start to get oriented to using the chat. Marcia, if you want to go on to the next slide. And we also have a question for everybody in the audience now in the chat, just in a word or a phrase in your own life, or just how you think about it. How do you define peer career advancement? What does it mean to you? It probably means something a little bit different to everybody. So if you can just add a word or a phrase about what that means to you, we'll kind of debrief that a little bit after we hear from Kevin. Barsha, if you want to move on to the next slide, and Kevin, if you're ready.
I am. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Cleare, and thank you all for having me at this the webinar. I currently work for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene as a supervisor for our co-response and health engagement and assessment teams. Our co-response teams are a partnership between the health department and NYPD to engage folks who are in crisis, at risk for continued criminal justice involvement, and really try to connect people to person-centered services, which will mitigate any future involvement. And in the same token, our health engagement and assessment teams do that great work as well, working to address the opioid epidemic here in the city, and again, utilizing a peer workforce to engage folks and use that valued lived experience to meet people where they're at and connect them to the services that they identify will improve their overall health. Next slide. So my journey began in about 2006, 2007, following a dark moment in my life, following an incarceration. And I had really just started to think about what am I going to do with my life in terms of employment. And a wonderful organization, I plugged them, Hands Across Long Island, had visited me while I was incarcerated and mentioned becoming a peer specialist, mentioned using what quote unquote people would look at as negative experiences in a positive way. And I went to Howie T. Hart Peer Advocacy Center in Harlem, and I enrolled in about a 9 to 12 month peer training course there, which really was like a crash course in behavioral health and peer support. Towards the end of that course, one of the job placement counselors basically came to the cohort, came to the class and said, hey, we're having a job fair, so to speak, but it's more so a mock interview, just to try to get people in the habit of going on interviews and talking about their skills and talking about their experiences. And she made it pretty clear, like, the organizations that were there were not hiring. So, folks, my peers in that classroom at that time, some decided to show up to the job fair and some didn't, thinking that, well, there's really not going to be any opportunity to get a job, why would I go? And interestingly, I met with a director of an emerging forensic act team here in the city who liked me, and we started connecting via email, and I ended up getting that job. And I just tell this anecdotal story just to say that you never know where an opportunity can lead you. And an opportunity may seem like it's not going to go anywhere or it's not going to be that fruitful. I just encourage folks to always show up, be your best self, and see where it goes. And again, in my roles at this ACT team, the Cases Nathaniel ACT team, I accepted new challenges and various, whether it be substance use or entitlements, and I was promoted yearly. And I kind of took the traditional career path. We had an opening in a position of our substance abuse specialist, and the organization sponsored me applying for my Case Act license, which helped me to now earn a credential that would earn an additional, a higher rate of pay. And a couple more years progressed, and I was kind of at a place where I thought about shifting careers and going into nursing. And I flirted with that idea. I'm not so good with the sciences, and I'm not afraid to say it in front of the 100 or so people who are on the webinar, that I failed out of nursing school. But I then returned back to become a director of an alternative to incarceration program. And so I just, again, never give up. Each failure is an opportunity to reinvent yourself, to adjust and shift and reassess. Continue to be genuine and good at what you do, and look for opportunities to connect with other folks. I urge everyone to focus on your strengths, your assets. I think we as peers, we give our hearts, we give our lives, we talk about our darkest secrets, and I think we should be compensated for that. And I think in human services, we kind of shy away from talking about money and compensation. And I think you can still be humble and genuine and still advocate for what you believe you're worth. I encourage everyone to document your accomplishments. And again, don't be afraid to talk about them while still remaining humble. Next slide, please, Marsha. So, some quick career advancement tips. Don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. Looking back, I've had colleagues say to me, I spent about 7 or 8 years at my first organization. And depending on your philosophy, one may think, well, that's a lot of time. I consider myself a loyal employee. Some may say I married an organization. So you really need to always just evaluate where you are. And if you're reaching a ceiling, don't be afraid to now reach out to your network and ask them what's going on at another organization or agency. It's never. I also want to urge everyone on this webinar, it's never too early to begin planning for the future. We want to avoid a crisis, whether it's a toxic work environment, whether you're not getting promotions you think you should be getting, whether it's pay, financial commitments, responsibilities. Don't wait, and this is sometimes easier said than done, of course. Don't wait until the crisis before you start sending out feelers or reaching out to folks. And I just urge everyone to stay connected with your peers and colleagues. And, I'm always refreshed. Rita spoke about the peer conference here in the city. I'm always refreshed when I go there and I meet up with other people and I hear what they're doing. And just that literally just staying connected with folks. If someone doesn't hear from you in a while, they can say, hey, I spoke to Kevin, I saw him at the conference. We have another opportunity. We have something that I think would be a good fit for you. Could you just go back real quick, Marsha? Thank you. And reaching out to folks ahead of time. And never, 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 never give up. I wanted to also talk about being mindful of negative self-talk. I think sometimes we ourselves, and I've been guilty of this, we can prevent ourselves from accessing a network or an opportunity. We may think so-and-so is too busy, or so-and-so never has time for me, there's a better candidate. You never know what the other individual that you may be trying to connect with, your email, phone, has on their plate, what's in their mind. I have an interesting story where I was in the hall, and I had applied for a position, applied, emailed back and forth with the supervisor. It kind of reached a wall, so I thought I wasn't going to get the position. I ran into a colleague in the hall, and it's like, maybe I think you should reach out to that person. I'm not sure where they are with their candidate selection process, but I have a feeling that you should reach out. And sure enough, I reached out. That was the job I had prior to this job, which was more around policy. And sure enough, the timing of it it just worked out. So I would encourage folks not to be mindful of self-talk, and always be optimistic. Next slide, thank you. Next slide, Marsha. Thank you. I entitled my slide deck Career Advancement and Beyond. Beyond, I want to encourage the peer workforce to think about other career paths. As I mentioned, I thought about nursing. Think about technology. Soon we're going to go to, I believe we're going to head towards Skyping a lot of behavioral health sessions. Think about quality assurance, quality improvement. Outside of the box, peers can also advance their careers through consulting, providing trainings specific to how do peers document notes, the use of peer-centered language, obviously trauma-informed practice. I wanted to also encourage my peers to look for opportunities to earn a living, but also become entrepreneurs and their own bosses. Always assess what you're bringing to the table and reassess what you're getting in return. This is a relational process, and you should always be giving and taking from a work setting. Next slide, and I think we're almost questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kevin. That was really good. And, we had a couple of questions that popped up in the chat earlier, and one in particular was asking about sort of a range of, as you've gone through your advancement, and this could be either for you, Gita, or for you, Kevin, sort of a range of salaries or a range of pay scale that how it's changed over time.
Listen, I'll chime in. I mean, I'll be brutally honest with folks. When I first entered the field, my first salary was about $25,000 a year, and thank God I'm no longer making that. I progressed, towards the 30s and 40s and 50s and on. So I've been very blessed. I'm not, with each title change came an increase. With increased responsibility, and also, shifting into policy, I was also able to leverage a salary that I was making in a certain arena against a proposed salary in the current title that I have. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Varsha, if you want to go on to the next slide. So our next question for the chat is, what are you doing currently towards advancing your own career? If you're moving from volunteer to a paid position, or maybe from a part-time to a full-time position, or from a direct peer position to a supervisor position, or there's all kinds of different ways in which you may be advancing your career. So just think about where you are now, what you are working towards next, and we'll be talking more about that as we move into the next section. Okay, Varsha. And so it's my pleasure to also welcome Liz Breier and Jessica Wolf, who are two of the three presenters for a workshop that was given at the 12th Annual Conference for Working Peer Specialists just last month at NYU. Next slide. Varsha. So these are the slides that follow in this next piece are excerpts from that workshop that they presented. It was Jessica, Liz, Jeremy. Next slide. And I will invite Liz and Jessica, either or both of you, to maybe talk through these next couple of slides about what agencies can do to promote and support career development and advancement. And I may need to unmute one of you. I think, Liz, you're unmuted, so let me see if Jessica is.
Jessica, do you want to? Hi, everyone. Jessica, do you want to take the lead on it?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. Hello, everybody, and thank you to Brita et al. For doing this event. And I like the way you're combining both the individual stories as well as the sort of broader perspective on career advancement. So some of the things that proactive agencies may be doing would be to assure that supervisors discuss career advancement with supervisees. And by the way, in a survey that some other colleagues and I did a couple of years ago, the proportions of time that supervisors were doing that nationally were not so very wonderful. So it's really important. Include promotion and increased compensation opportunities in regular performance reviews so that it becomes part of the conversation that we're by definition thinking about career advancement. To provide release time and funding for staff continuing education and academic studies. Again, these are things that progressive agencies can do. Obviously, they require time and money. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And some other things are to create senior management roles for peers and hire peers into those roles. And again, some other colleagues that have been doing research on this have found that that really can make a big difference in the extent to which peers are really a full part of agencies and agencies change as a consequence. Advocate for peer advancement, which we already mentioned a little bit. And create career and compensation ladders within the agency. You know, I think that when this field started, there were some people who had this kind of attitude, well, you know, peer workers should be happy they have jobs, since we all know the unemployment rate among people with mental health conditions is really high. But that isn't the way to look at it. It's really anybody who becomes an employee and starts working has the right to and ought to be thinking about career development. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean going up a ladder. Some people want to stay where they are or add new skills and so forth. It's simply the idea of paying attention to one's career, both from the agency perspective and the individual one. Okay, let's go on. And maybe Liz will chime in.
Yep.
Liz, do you want to speak to this part?
Yeah, sure. So some other key points would be assuring that we have peer voice throughout the system. My personal feeling on that is that tends to ebb and flow. There are times, depending on what's going on in the system, where we're more present, and then there are other times where maybe our voice is not as strong as it could be. But the stronger our voice is throughout the system, the stronger it's going to be in our respective places of employment as well. The second point being assuring that peer certification can be transferred within and between states. That's what actually happened to me. I was born and raised in New York, but moved to New Jersey for a few years, and I'd been working on my peer certification through the Academy of Peer Services. And when I realized we were moving, I stopped because New Jersey would not transfer over to New Jersey, so it would not have counted for anything. So that would be helpful, I think, because we have a lot of folks that come to New York from other states. I've worked in both New Jersey and Florida. And then we have folks who leave here to go to other states. So that would also be helpful in the continuity, I think, of keeping the certification useful everywhere we go without having to take it over again in each state. This is one that I'm particularly passionate about. Ensure that employees are aware of the various work incentives offered through Social Security to maximize benefits and to be able to keep Medicaid while working. This is a huge thing that people don't realize. Incentives such as Medicaid buy-in, which is actually a little bit misleading in New York because it's currently free, and it has been since it began. But I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head. It changes usually every year. It will change. But someone who is working can earn up to around 63 and change annually and not lose their Medicaid through the Medicaid buy-in program. And that's something that most peers who are working don't know. So when an agency, and this is something I've been asked to do as a supervisor, the majority of my career, and I've been working in this field for 20 years now, has been in supervisory and director roles in agencies, and it's not uncommon that you'll be given one full-time employee spot and say, now split that between 4 peer specialists. So you don't have, you're not getting full-time hours, you're not getting the benefits. And for folks who are lucky enough to find full-time work, the insurance, private insurance, does not pay as well as Medicaid does for many of the things that folks seek, and the cost is takes a huge chunk out of people's checks. So there are a lot of work incentives if you're interested in more, not to plug the coalition in this webinar, but we do offer training on benefits, both SSDI and SSI, in case anyone is interested. But I think these things would be very helpful in, an agency can save on fringe if the individual keeps their Medicaid. So that could also lead to higher salaries and more opportunity for promotion. Next slide.
Thanks, Liz. And I just wanted to pause here for a minute before we even ask the chat question, because it dawned on me I didn't leave space and time for you and Jessica to introduce yourselves. So I will introduce the chat question, but while people are answering this chat question, we could pause here for a minute. And Jessica, if you could tell us a little bit about your experience and interest in this topic, but I'll ask Liz to go first. Liz, if you could talk a little bit about, your experience rising up through the ranks, and then Jessica, your interest in and sort of the alliance that you had started a while back. Let's talk a little bit about that before we move on into the rest of the webinar. And for the rest of you that are on the chat, what is your agency or organization at this point doing based on the different strategies that were just presented? Is there anything that your agency or organization is doing now to promote or advance peer careers, or is there something you wish they would be doing? So you can respond in the chat, and Liz, go ahead and tell us a little more about yourself.
Sure, okay. So I guess my career journey started, I've had mental health issues since childhood. I openly disclose that I'm a trauma survivor, but when I was coming into working in this field, which was around 1999-2000, the use of peers was not really happening at that time, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about people using their lived experience. I certainly didn't learn it in school, and I was on the track to becoming a social worker. I was working full-time and going to school part-time in a community mental health center in Florida, when I had an incident that happened at work that I had no choice but to disclose, because I had, a very public event happen in my place of employment. And when that happened, the response to it by my colleagues and people that I'd worked with was not an optimal response. There was a lot of change in their behavior towards me, some internal stigma from within the system towards my suddenly, crossing over and being on the other side of the line in their eyes. And I found that so distasteful that instead of moving on to become a social worker, I decided I wasn't going to do that, that I didn't like the way that I was being treated, and I didn't like that internal stuff that was going on. And I came back to New York and moved forward with getting a master's in health advocacy instead. When I ended up disclosing, though, opportunities opened up for me in the sense that I was asked to run some of the first peer-run programs in Lee County, Florida. So I was supervising what we called recovery coaches, which I understand here in New York, substance abuse folks call their staff recovery coaches, but this was for mental health. The first warm line and the first peer-run respite house, as well as a drop-in center. I've had so many different types of roles over the last 20 years because I tend to move around a lot due to some family stuff that goes on. So I've been in director roles. My last job prior to coming to the coalition to work as a trainer was as the director of 25 wellness centers for collaborative support programs in New Jersey. New Jersey uses peers very regularly. They don't necessarily call them peer specialists. It's a little more free-flowing there. I've also worked with youth advocates and family advocates here in New York City through Families on the Move. I've just had my hands in a bunch of different things, but the one constant has been supervising and assisting peers in figuring out what directions they want to go in. I do not identify as a consumer or ex-patient survivor, but I've always been very drawn to the passion and the lived experience from folks who identify in that way. And I love the desire and the drive to the grassroots side of it, to advocate and to make things better for folks and to not have individuals re-traumatized by the system. So when I look to support folks in their career development, I try to blend as much of that as possible into the work, knowing that there'll always be pushback in traditional agencies, but so what? That's why we do it. So I've been really blessed, I think, in the fact that I've been able to, really support individuals in moving forward towards having a career if they want to, because not everybody thinks of it that way. Not everybody thinks of peer support in that way. That's part of the ongoing debate that we have in New York specifically of, peer employment versus peer support, and that these can sometimes be different things. So, that's really a little bit of just my trajectory. So I'm actually currently working on getting certified as a peer specialist. I'm 2 classes short, so I'll be finishing that this year and moving forward with applying for that as well. But as a supervisor, we for sure need more peer supervisors. We don't have a lot of folks with who identify as peers in those roles. At the time when I was doing it, I was like a unicorn. There was no one else, especially in Florida. It was just me. But things have changed, and the time, I think, is really ripe for folks, if they are interested in that, and the level of work change that'll come with that. I absolutely think that is a key piece in moving this forward in career development. I think that's probably it.
Thanks so much, Liz, and I'm glad to see there's more unicorns. It's still me being the only one. Thanks so much, Liz. Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about your background, your interest, and some of the things you've been up to?
Sure. I don't know where to begin. One of the benefits of being around for a while is you've been around for a while, and one of the disadvantages is you could bore people for a long time. So I'll try to be concise. I was interested in mental health issues for a long time in my career, and because of personal issues and because of family issues. Though they were not directly acknowledged in my interests, because in those days you sure didn't talk about it. So I became an administrator and a planner and an educator, mostly in the public, well, pretty much all in the public sector in Connecticut. And in the course of that, it was very exciting times because we lived through the shift from large state hospitals to beginning of community-based services to looking at rehabilitation, psychiatric rehabilitation, which led into talking about recovery, which really led into the peer concept. Well, during that time, I got involved with human resource development, and we actually started a mental health certificate program which prepared people, including people with mental health conditions, for entry-level positions in the mental health workforce. This was when we were transitioning patients, quote unquote, and staff from large state hospitals into community-based settings, and we didn't have enough workforce. And it was also the time that the disability rights movement was saying, nothing about us without us. And so the whole idea of people in recovery having a role in helping other people in recovery, because we didn't use the term peer yet, was prominent. So I got involved with developing this mental health certificate program, and I moved over from being an administrator to being an educator. Well, I mean, I had done some other teaching, but and it was such a wonderful experience because I was the coordinator of the program, and people were not required to disclose because this was a community college where you can't require people to disclose. People did, many people did disclose, but many didn't, and turned out later, in questionnaires and so forth that we did. So I became a teacher, and I developed these different courses, and I also advise students in their career path, and that was for 16 years. It was from the 90s till 2008, and during that time, of course, the field started changing a lot, and we started to be developing the peer role. And so some of our graduates went on into peer roles, and some of them didn't, et cetera. Long story, and I've written an article about that I'm happy to share with people. So for my own trajectory, and then I got more and more involved in workforce development issues because Connecticut got a transformation grant from the SAMHSA, and we had a significant workforce component in that. And I was very involved with the workforce component. One part of it was an employment piece for people in recovery. That was probably what we said then, who wanted to work in any part of the mental health system. So it wasn't only, quote, direct care, it was also administration or anything. So I was kind of helping to oversee and manage that particular project and some other ones. Eventually, after that, which was several years, I got on my soapbox when I saw that all these peer specialist programs were getting developed and certification without any academic credentials either required or provided. Because the students who graduated from the Merge Mental Health Certificate Program had a certificate, they went on, they got an associate and a bachelor's, master's, etc. Peer specialists don't have that. And so I started running around the country carrying on about that and have continued in the whole career development angle. And at the same time, I also disclosed myself as a peer. I mean, it just made sense. I've never been in a peer specialist position. However, I certainly have personal and family lived experience. So that's how I now speak of myself. So I kind of cross over. The other thing about the Alliance was that at the INAPS conference in, what year was it, Rita? 2016, I think. I did some research with other people, which is just coming out. We're going to have some things published, and they are about career development in the next year. They'll be published. Nev Jones and Sharice Rosen and a couple other people. Essentially, I got, again, on the soapbox about career development, so I had a caucus at the INAPS conference in which I said, well, let's start something called the Alliance to Advance Peer Career or Peer Career Development. It didn't really take off as such. I mean, it kind of led off into a variety of other directions. But I think that now, this seems like this last few months, there's really a much more of it's like a tipping point moment where we're all starting to talk about career advancement more because there's a critical mass of peer specialists working. And so that then becomes more of an issue. And now I'm going to stop talking. I hope that answered your question.
That's great, Jessica. And yeah, I was so excited when the Alliance formed. It was in 2016 and hopeful that it was going to take off. But I think you're right. Now the time is ripe because more and more people are recognizing that there needs to be advancement opportunities for peers. You know, there's more peers that are in the workforce and more peers who now have experience in the workforce. It may have been in those days, it was still a relatively new profession, and it still is, but there's, more people who have, a need for being able to grow professionally as well as personally. So I think it's a great opportunity. Okay, Varsha, if you want to move on to the next slide, either Liz or Jessica, if you'd like to field this one.
You want me to take it, Jessica?
You start, yeah, and I'll get to the other part.
Sure. Okay, so some other possible career considerations and strategies. So right now, the majority of peer specialists are working in more mainstream agencies. We do have a few largely peer-run agencies in New York City and around the state, but in general, folks are working in mainstream agencies, either in housing or some other type of direct service. But there's potential for peers to bring their magic to other areas as well, such as non-behavioral health settings, peer-run agencies, like I stated. Integrated health and behavioral health is really starting to become a thing now. There's more and more conversation about it. And as we know, there are a lot of folks who live with, not just a mental health issue, but also some pretty significant physical health issues. I am someone who falls into that category, and it can be very challenging. So the insight that we can bring to how to navigate all of that is very, very valuable because there isn't a lot of discussion happening on the peer side necessarily about that. So I think there's potential there. Next slide. Some of the other opportunities could be, respite house, which we do have folks working in respite house around the state. Health navigators, those are folks who would work in hospital settings, in a regular hospital, not necessarily a psychiatric hospital. Health advocacy, which again is the master's program that I went to, which looks more at system issues. It wasn't specifically about the mental health field. It was about healthcare in general. And so folks with that degree, can work in policy or work as ombudsmen or health navigators inside hospitals. There's room, whether it's from an organization or if folks wanted to move into, more self-directed entrepreneurial type of work around specific health conditions, where you could be focusing on, say, living with autoimmune disorders and a mental health challenge, or balancing substance use issues, mental health, and physical health issues. There's so much opportunity there. Palliative care. And if we were to have academic credentials, what would that look like around peerness? So many of us end up going the more traditional route because we're interested in advancement, and whether I agree with it or not, we work in a country where, your credentials are what open up the door most of the time for people to move up. So if you weren't going to get a degree in social work or as a mental health clinician, which many people don't want because they feel that their values will be challenged by that, what else could you do? In our workshop, we talked about folks reaching out into the arts. There's so much work around trauma healing and the arts, the mind-body connection, things like yoga, theater, dance, all different potential within the arts to, earn a degree in that and bring that expertise back to the traditional system or non-traditional if you chose. Anything else you wanted to add, Jessica?
Well, I think we have a little more on that. There's another slide coming up about that, some of those additional out-of-the-box things. So I think it's after let's go on to the next slide.
Next slide.
Okay, so this...
Oops, I was on mute, sorry. So as we think about some of these different options for peers to advance their careers, what are some of the things that you can think about if you haven't already added these ideas, either at the individual level or at the organizational or at the system level, that might be tried, that you can try, or that others can help to implement? Just some ideas about that. We're just continuing to try to keep the ideas rolling about, what are some specific career advancement strategies. And I believe that Jessica and Liz will have a few more in the next slide. Go ahead, Michelle.
Right, I'll do the next one. Yeah, so this is the quote, out of the box career options. And some of them are sort of procedural and some of them are substantive. So first of all, thinking about lateral transfer of skills. In other words, the skills that people learn as peer specialists or in peer roles, as Liz was saying, can be used in all kinds of other types of work. And so thinking about that and opening ourselves up to that is very helpful. Developing new roles and income sources, self-employment, entrepreneurial options, and so forth. And Kevin mentioned that, there are people doing work on running our own businesses and being consultants to people, et cetera, which creates a much more independent place. It's also scary and a less secure income source, nevertheless worth considering. Creative arts, as Liz was saying, another piece of that is improv and comedy. We have so much creativity, and when you go to workshops and conferences, there's a woman, Gail Bluebird, who's been working on creative arts for years, and then there are other people doing stand-up and improv. These are all possibilities. Public relations, when you think about some of what peer specialists do is market and communicate. Life coaching, motivational speaking, and you all may have other ideas. I think the sky is the limit in a way. We're living in a time when there's a lot more flexibility about careers. when we talk about the gig economy, people are doing a piece of something and making a living at it, or they're able to work remotely. So anyway, I think there's just a lot of possibilities, and that thinking about these is exciting, and it's important to open ourselves up to those possibilities.
So I'd like to pause here for a minute because I'm seeing a few things coming in on the chat that I'd like to respond to. And I also wanted to mention in some of our planning sessions, I got very excited about the idea of entrepreneurial advocacy, in which we go in and really talk about the benefits of peer support in places that maybe have never thought about peer support as an option, but places that, we can create our own jobs in many cases if we really talk about and demonstrate the benefits of it. So that was one that I thought of. I have Patricia who said, I used to be an EMT and would love to work with first responders. Let's see, work at Dutchess County, as well as counselors, MHA, and peer advocacy work, a hospital diversion providing respite and sobering room, as well as service for families. We all work well in concert with each other. I also wanted to respond, Jessica, to the idea of advanced opportunities for academic.
Yes.
Because certainly at Rutgers, we do have an undergraduate certificate program in peer support. I am one of the instructors in that program, and it's completely separate from the Academy of Peer Services. It has nothing to do with neither one of them are a part of each other, but Rutgers does offer undergraduate certificate that can be transferred into other human service related credentials. So it's a great opportunity. And there are others. You had created a program a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago now, Jessica, doing the very same thing. So there are, I think, more opportunities coming up there. Right. Anyone else? Let's see. New York City Parachute Squad. Yeah. And I'm seeing more and more. I'm trying to catch up with the pod or the chat, and I said I started a podcast for advocacy and educating about mental illness, and podcasting is a great option. And then tell the EMT what that is. Emergency medical technician? Is that like ambulance drivers and medical staff that are first responders? And parachute is a peer crisis respite, from what I understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
And somebody was asking what a podcast is, and that's an audio recording of a show like this. Like we're doing a webinar right now. If we took the audio from this, we could post it as a podcast for people to just listen to it. That's what a podcast is. Okay, any other ideas for out-of-the-box career options? Feel free to add that to the chat as we go forward. Varsha, you want to move on to the next slide? So this is kind of our final question, I think, for the chat, and that is, how do you see your own career in 5 years? What actions are needed for you to reach your goals? So you can respond to that, and you can go on to the next slide, Varsha. Some of the things you might consider is a list generated today of career development and career advancement options, and maybe creating a personal action plan. We will be posting the presentation slides at the end of you'll get just please respond to a brief survey about how we did with this particular webinar and any recommendations for future webinars. And in that, we'll include the slides from this presentation. And I also wanted to mention that we have contact information directly for Jessica, Jeremy, and Liz. If you want to go to the next slide, Varsha. And I just really want to thank Gita and Kevin for their personal stories and their presentation. When you get the slides, you'll be able to see their email addresses and be able to contact them. This contact information is for Jessica, Liz, and Jeremy, who was the original presenter for this workshop that they did at the New York conference at New York University last week. And don't go to the next slide yet, Varsha, but you can also, if there's any questions that you have, at this point for any of the presenters, I'll take questions while we've got these, got the contact information up. I'm just trying to see if there's a question to respond to. Somebody was asking about a home and community-based services program to apply to. Just some of these are just questions to each other and about the podcast. So feel free to ask any additional questions in the chat. We're going to move on now. Go ahead and advance the next slide, Varsha, and the next slide. I just wanted to give a very quick word from our sponsor. It is now 1 o'clock. We're due to go to 1:15. But I wanted to first just mention a little bit about the New York City Peer and Community Health Worker Workforce Consortium Toolkit. Go on to the next slide. And I'm sort of mourning that Aviva wasn't here because she could do such a great job. We do have a full webinar that was recorded on the toolkit, and when you get the follow-up email from this session, you'll be able to access the full webinar about this if you want more information. So I'm just going to give a very quick overview. But the consortium created a needs-based toolkit, which is a self-assessment, and a self-assessment that provides resources for wherever an organization is in their readiness to incorporate peers in the workforce. Next slide. So the purpose is to increase the capacity for employers to be ready and supportive of workforce integration and growth. Next slide. It's based on 9 domains of organizational practices that are recommended to address the gaps in providing support, expanding the workforce, and understanding, in particular, the peer workforce. Those 9 areas are recruitment, attitudes and belief, diversity and inclusion, finances and sustainability, role clarity and workflows, and of course, number 6 is what we just did an entire presentation on today, career advancement opportunities, supervision, orientation and onboarding, and then program monitoring and evaluation. Next slide. So when you actually look at the self-assessment within the toolkit, you'll see these areas, and I won't go into great detail about this, but if you look at the other webinar, you'll see more about this and how to actually access it. Next slide. In particular, item number 6, the self-assessment on career advancement opportunities. These are some of the questions that are asked on the self-assessment, which would be, and the responses to each of these questions are never, sometimes, about half the time, most of the time, or always. So in response to that, does your organization have advanced peer specialist or community health worker positions, such as supervisors, mentors, advisors, for those peer specialists or community health workers who demonstrate success and experience in their roles? Is higher pay provided for more advanced peer specialist and community health worker positions? Are peer specialists and community health workers informed of training opportunities that align with their needs and interests? And how often does your organization schedule events or training sessions so that employees from a variety of disciplines can attend? So this is a sampling of the questions, and these are the questions particularly around career advancement opportunities. Depending on what the employer or the person who's answering the self-assessment answers, they'll get different resources that will point them in the direction of how to further develop or further grow their programs. Next slide. So the whole purpose of the toolkit is to engage all employees in the self-assessment process, and it enhances efforts to improve readiness to integrate, increase, begin, or just grow peer and community health worker programs. So it creates an organizational culture that values input from all employees, expands awareness of other processes within the organization, and it prevents side-by-side interdisciplinary kind of siloing or tunnel vision. Highlights areas of strong consensus as well as divergent or different perspectives. It strengthens motivation to engage in shared priorities around changes with pressure to respond to an imposed directive, and it adds meaning to the idea of workforce integration and its challenges, which seem more real as dynamics manifest in the process, creating insight around all areas in the self-assessment. And before we go on, what I wanted to mention is one of the things that the consortium is doing in a couple of areas, and I happen to be in one of the areas where we're doing this. I live in the Finger Lakes region of New York, and we work with the Regional Planning Consortium on a number of different just initiatives, and one of them is organizational readiness for peer integration. So the toolkit has come along at a time where we're forming learning communities or learning collaboratives. At least that's the intent. So if you know of one or more organizations that are planning on doing learning communities around the toolkit, I'll give you Aviva Cohen's email address because she's sort of coordinating them around the toolkit. But I also we have a great interest in this within the virtual community too, because our virtual community is about creating communities of practice, and this toolkit self-assessment is a great way to get communities of practice jump-started along the lines of things that really need attention. Okay, next slide, Varsha. So to access the toolkit, there is a link that you will get in the email that you'll be getting in the slides, so you can go to it there. You can also access it directly on the Department of Health website. If you go to the Providers section and then the Resources section under Providers on the Department of Health website, you'll be able to see the link to supporting peers and community health workers in their roles, and that is the self-assessment toolkit. Next slide, Varsha. So are there any questions about that? So I wanted to mention that Chris Coyle has mentioned that the New York the NICE system, the New York Employment Service System, and Ticket to Work can provide anyone 18 to 64 on SSI or SSDI to find competitive integrated employment. And there's information about that he's provided in the chat. I will make the chat information available also in that follow-up email. I'll take out everybody's name, but I'll leave the content in there of each of the questions, so you'll be able to get that as well. And I know that Liz said that they also have training on Social Security benefits and work incentives, I believe. So, okay, there's a lot of discussion on that. All right, if there's no other questions, then I'm just going to go ahead and copy the chat if you want to go to the last slide now, Varsha. And I just want to, on behalf of the New York City Peer and Community Health Worker Workforce Consortium, thank you to our presenters, Gita, Kevin, Liz, and Jessica, and to also thank the Office of Mental Health, Office of Consumer Affairs, wonderful partners. We really appreciate all of your assistance and technical assistance on this webinar series. And I just wanted to say thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too.
Glad you could join us.